Welcome, everyone. This is SatiSeva. My name is Julia. I'm one of the facilitators of the Spokane Sangha, and I'm happy to be here. I'm going to invite our chime to sing and bring you into the fold of this beautiful practice. For those of you who are new today, SatiSeva is an offering and an approach to recovery and support. So this is an opportunity for people who are in the position of a family member or a friend, an ally, even a professional, can come here and practice mindfulness with people who are actually in recovery as well. This is our way of using the practices and principles of Buddhism, using the framework of recovery Dharma even to bring everybody on the same playing field to practice and explore mindfulness together. It is my way of reimagining how we talk about recovery, how we engage in more supportive ways. To begin our practice today, I would like to set the intention with a sentiment of metta, loving kindness. And I've got all of these wonderful little cards of loving kindness, little hand painted things. This one reads, may you reflect the splendor of life. May you reflect the splendor of life. Take a moment, friends, and arrive. Take a moment and allow the gratitude I have for you being here, practicing. Your presence matters. The splendor of life as you here in this space is a blessing. I wonder, can you let that in to your mind and heart? Can you turn an inward gaze and can you turn an inward voice that says to yourself, I am the splendor of life. I reflect the splendor of life. And if you were to say that to yourself, can you give yourself a moment or two to simply observe what arises? Is there denial? Is there resistance or discomfort? Is there something within you that's like, yeah, hip, hip, hooray for me? I reflect the splendor of life. Let's just breathe that in together as a community. Friends, for the month of September in our SatiSeva practice, we have been exploring the mindfulness practice of grief. It is the 14th of 16 practices. grief. When you hear the word, what arises for you? What comes alive in you? It's just something to take notice. Yesterday, I took some time to watch the video, the first ever that we recorded. It was the first Wednesday, I believe it was. And maybe, yeah, it was Wednesday. And I was bracing myself to be really uncomfortable, to watch myself on video, to have some inner critic ready to nitpick. I think you all know what I feared. It's just that egoic inner critic that we all possess. I don't think I'm unique in this way, just hypercritical, hyper alert, looking for the flaws, looking for the mistakes, ready to point it out at a moment's notice. And I was so pleasantly surprised that that voice was quiet. And I thoroughly enjoyed this video. And yes, there were a couple of things that came up, but it was all right. And it reminded me of what I want to talk about today in terms of grief. And before I get into that, I kind of want to set the stage. I want to create a preface about grief. And my motivation for doing so is I really want to emphasize that this particular mindfulness practice is to encourage the mind and the heart to expand beyond a sense of loss of life. We grieve so much more than just the loss of life. We grieve when we're disappointed. We grieve when our relationships end. We grieve when we fail to align with our aspirations and our integrity. In other words, when we live outside the borders and boundaries of who we want to be, we grieve what's happening. And sometimes in the weight of grief, it's hard to move. It's hard to stay motivated. It's hard to feel encouraged. It's hard to generate the creativity to keep going. But that's only when we are unpracticed. That's only when we fall into the habit energy of not being curious, of not practicing inquiry, not using the instrument of peace. Would you look at this? Why am I feeling this way? What's up with that? Grief is an extraordinary experience that we all have in so many different ways. And the thing that's kind of cool, I think, about grief is that it's not a standalone. And what I mean by that is we can grieve and be happy at the same time. And that oppositional state of being can create some conflict and some dissonance in the mind and in the heart. And that's why it's important to examine. Because in the Western mind, we have this habit energy that suggests, no, I have to be either one or the other. And if I'm grieving, I have to understand it well enough that I can get rid of it so I can get back to being happy and only happy. And if I'm only happy, then anytime grief is skirting the edges of my life, I'm going to feel threatened because, oh no, my happiness is going to go away. But as we begin to really understand the conditions that allow grief to come alive within us, we see, oh, my grief coexists with my joy, with my compassion, with my kindness, with my dreams and aspirations. It does not have to be one or the other. In fact, when I'm real about it, it's both. So today, I'd like to read just a little bit from the SatiSeva book. And it's from the chapter of grief, and it's a section that I really love. It's called Grief at Love's Doorway. And I just want to share with you a couple of paragraphs. Grief at Love's Doorway. The multitude of ways grief can enter our lives boggles the imagination when one really thinks about it. I've experienced grief gently knocking at the door of my heart, waiting patiently to be let in. I've also had grief knock the door down and come into the center of my life like a thief in the night. Grief has sometimes hovered and paced around the edges of my awareness. There have been many times in my life I have been able to keep grief at bay, denying its entry. As I look deeply, I realize grief can be a profound teacher, inviting rich texture and depth to images and spaciousness of balaklohes, altars of understanding. When I imagine grief as something on the other side of my sacred border, like a newspaper or a wet dog sitting on my doorstep, I feel empowered. Suddenly, I have agency over what aspects of grief I would welcome in and what aspects needed to stay outside for just a little bit. Thinking of grief as an active experience at an entryway helped me see both my familiar habits and patterns and wide open space for new possibilities. Like any step toward change, I've observed myself linger with grief, trying to discern the newness awaiting me. I've learned over and over that the first step away from old patterns is the hardest. It is a kind of grief. This is why the liminal space of a doorway is so powerful. We can lean into what's new for a moment and then back into what's familiar, repeating that movement for a long time before we ever step far enough away from the known until it fades and the new takes hold. I wanted to bring that image forward, a doorway, maybe even in the balaklohe. And for those of you who are gathering with us today for the first time, a balaklohe is Gaelic, by the way. Those two words, bala means stone, clohe means wall, and it is an image for a boundary, a beautiful, sacred border, a place that separates me from another person. But that separation is not a severance. It's not an amputation. It's not a great distance. In fact, that border can become an altar of understanding, a place where I can meet someone and we can have mutuality, we can have exchanges, and we can safely stay in our separate spaces while simultaneously learning to understand one another. And this is essential in the realm of recovery and support. Because when somebody is in negative habit energy, active addiction, for example, it is so tempting as a support person to get into that person's space. Sometimes the interference is good and sometimes it isn't. So to at least have a place of pause, to at least have some boundary, to rest a moment, to bear witness a moment, to observe and discern what will actually help. That is powerful and sometimes full of grief. Because as I observe someone who is suffering in their own space with the confusion and chaos that often accompanies negative habit energy, whatever it is, I am bearing witness to that, knowing that I can't do much to help. I can't do much other than to remain present, encouraging, and nurturing. And that helplessness feels like grief. And sometimes it is. And so the boundary helps us grow in our capacity to stay present. To allow our loved one on the other side a little bit of agency to figure it out for themselves, to stay present with encouragement, to stay present with advice, to stay present, pointing out directions and enough spaciousness for people to figure it out in their own way and in their own time. The last time we gathered, I had mentioned in that video exchanges that can happen at the balaclohe, hurt that can happen at the balaclohe, hurt feelings, disappointments, failed expectations, bewilderment, anger, rage. And all of that is under the umbrella of grief. Bearing witness to somebody who is confused, somebody whose faculties, their cognitive capacity, the ability to critically think, the ability to regulate emotions, the ability to control impulsivity, all of that is compromised when intoxicants are on board. We know that intellectually, but emotionally, to witness that is something else. And in the process of witnessing that in a loved one, we may be at risk for being on the receiving end of harm, unskillful speech, manipulation. There are people who, when they are in active addiction, they engage in unethical misconduct. So people will steal, they'll be manipulative. And that's very, very painful to be around, to be exposed to. So, how do you stay present to it? How do you stay strong and boundaried? How do you juggle that it's both personal and not at the same time? I know I've been in situations with people in active addiction, and they can say some really mean spirited things. And while I know the reason for that, the emotional dysregulation, the corruption that happens in the mind due to the intoxicant, I know that they don't really mean it. I get that. And yet, ow, that hurts. And it's not okay. So It's not as easy as saying, well, just don't take anything personally. We have to be really careful about that because, as I mentioned in the previous video, it can be spiritually bypassing. When things hurt, they hurt. And I am allowed to feel that hurt. And again, it's the bothness of it. I feel that hurt and I fully understand the conditions of why it's arising. And I don't have to hold on to it forever. I certainly don't have to hold it over my loved one, but I also don't need to deny it for myself that this person said something to me or did something that negatively impacted me and it hurt. Both are true. And the truth is that when we can be present to all of it, we grow in our capacity to be patient, to be clear, to be kind in our boundaries. And here's the thing that's so beautiful about that part of it is when we are clear in our boundaries, I will not allow you to have an audience with me. I'm not going to make myself available because I don't want to be hurt. When you are in active addiction, you are unethical in your conduct, and that hurts me. So I'm not going to make myself available. At the same time, by having that boundary, we also change the conditions for our loved one to not be hurtful. They no longer have access to harm. And that is a very positive condition to uphold. So while I'm not getting hurt, my loved one also doesn't have an opportunity to be harming, at least to me. That's amazing. But getting to that point, it's a practice. And an aspect of this practice is grief because we grieve not being able to be connected to a loved one. We grieve having to have that increased separation. We grieve having to witness the disruptive behavior, the confusion, the chaos. It's painful to see. And as we're practicing, we make mistakes. That's part of it. And so we grieve our own unskillfulness. And right beside that grief, friends, however, is this strength of awareness. To be present and to bear witness is to maintain awareness. You can see it all happening. When you see yourself being unskillful, when you see yourself grieving a mistake, at the same time, that awareness begins to activate the repair, the thing that you need to learn and improve upon. So that's the lesson there. That's the strengthening and the empowering, and it lives side by side with grief. So let's take some time, some silence together. And I invite you to think about a balaclohe, your stone wall, and maybe put a doorway in it and lean into the space of someone else, maybe someone with whom you've had a conflict, whether it's related to substance use disorder or some other negative habit energy, it doesn't matter. The practice is all the same. Lean into their space, see what you're observing, see yourself, and then kind of lean back into your own space. See the way you reacted positively or negatively. What is there for you to learn? How is grief speaking to you? What is it trying to teach you? Keep the door open. Stand in that doorway. Notice the feeling of openness, the feeling of spaciousness. And as you reflect, just observe what's happening in your body and know that whatever is happening for you is likely also happening to a loved one. Remember, we're so much more alike than we are different. And so, this is a wonderful thing to remember that as much as you're at the doorway, neither able to move forward nor wanting to move back into familiar habits, you're just in this middle space, this liminal space. As much as you can see yourself there, remember your loved one's going to have an experience like that too. And when we can cultivate the awareness of that, we begin to nurture forgiveness and leniency, curiosity and openness. And these are beautiful qualities to bring to our altars of understanding. And these are also beautiful qualities for grief to settle softly in the mind and heart. Friends, as you practice working with grief, I want to encourage something new. And that is every time you have a difficult emotion arise for you, see if you can speak about it in terms of grief. So when you're experiencing a disappointment, say, rather than saying, I'm so frustrated with so and so, I'm just so disappointed that this, that, and the other thing didn't happen. Tell yourself, I'm grieving. Just for a moment, see what happens. See if something in that internal territory of the heart and the mind shifts just a little bit. See if the addition of that word opens up something new to you. And then if you're really brave, say it to someone. Hey, how you doing? You know, as strange as this may sound, I'd like to admit that I'm grieving right now. And just notice what happens with the other person. Grief is a strange territory. And it's ironic because it is such a human experience. We are destined to know it. And yet there is so little guidance. There is so little encouragement to speak of the experience of grief in real and tangible ways. And so I think, as I have reflected about it for a long time now, I think so many of the challenging feelings that I experience, they are feelings unto themselves, and yet they are also sistered by this thing called grief. When I feel fear, I'm grieving something familiar. When I feel anger, I'm grieving something that feels outside of my control. Usually, this is what's happening for me. And so I encourage you to take notice of your own experiences and allow grief to become a companion, a teacher, a guide. You may find new depths, new textures, new beauty to the whole of your life. Even in grief, you reflect the splendor of life. Okay. So I'd like to invite you to come back to the practice, to the reflections on grief. And one of the things that I want to send you home with is not only the practice of looking at difficult emotions, anger, disappointment, frustration, betrayal, blaming. See if you can fit those emotions under the umbrella of grief. And even if it doesn't apply, even if your mind is like, grief, how does that fit? Just the fact that you're entertaining the possibility is enough for something new to be revealed. So that's one thing I'd like you to take home and play with. The second thing I'd like you to take home and play with is a word, and I'm going to spell it out for you. It's called Satyagraha, and it's spelled Satyagraha. Satyagraha. It is a word that was introduced by Gandhi, and it is his practice of civil disobedience. And today, as a community, we heard about questioning and inquiry of, do I have a right to be happy when things are so difficult, when there's so much suffering in the world? In a word, the answer to that in a word is yes. In fact, it is a sacred duty to be aware of one's suffering and to bring forward the limitless quality of joy at the same time. Because joy is the air upon which hope can ascend. And the only way we can have that ascending hope and that joy is to first understand our own suffering. And that is the heart of Satyagraha, to know how one is suffering, how one is dealing with oppression. And one of the ways to disobey is to allow joy to come through, to understand one's suffering enough that one's joy can emerge enough to lift someone else up from the darkness of despair. That is civil disobedience. And I think that is a necessary thing in this time, but we cannot access this if we don't practice, if we don't first understand our own pain and despair, our own confusions. If we don't understand them, then we don't have then we don't have access to the limitlessness of compassion, loving kindness, joy, and equanimity. So, yes, we have a right to be happy, to be okay, and to use those qualities to support and to bring ease to pain and confusion and suffering. And by this practice, we will lead into next month's topic, which is to reduce violence. And I think you can see what happens is when we don't really understand our suffering and we don't allow joy to come through, the habitual reaction is violence. So we are here to be instruments of peace, and we are here to reflect the splendor of life. Let's dedicate this practice to all living beings everywhere. And I mean that, to all beings everywhere. May you be free from confusion and aggression. May you find places of ease and tolerance. May humility begin to become a virtue practiced in leadership. May all who are confused for all the reasons that confusion exists, may you find strength in friendship and clarity. May the light of this practice shine brightly for all living beings to find pathways to freedom. Thank you for your beautiful practice today. Thank you for your beautiful selves. We'll see you next time. Namaste.